Hello, everyone. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1224th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Martha Rosler and Alexander Alberro. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Martha Rosler's practice focuses on issues of the public sphere, addressing cultural and political concerns, both domestic and foreign, often through the feminist lens of their impact on the lives of women. Rosler has worked in a variety of media, including video, photography, text, sculpture, performance, and writing, always expanding upon her practice in an ongoing endeavor to incite questions of perception and truth as they relate to an ever-changing socio-political landscape. Recurring themes in Rosler's practice include urbanism, spaces of transit, war and national security, and patriarchal expectations of women. Her work invites consideration and critique of the systems governing everyday life, including those that often go unnoticed. And our host today, Alexander Alberro, Virginia Blodell Wright Professor in the Department of Art History at Barnard College and Columbia University, has written widely on modern and contemporary art and theory. He is the author of Interstices at Contemporary Art's Boundaries, coming out in June from University of Chicago Press. Previous single author volumes include Abstraction in Reverse and Conceptual Art and the Politics of Publicity. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alexander for the first question.
Thank you, Chloe. And welcome, everybody. Welcome, Martha. I am going to ask a series of questions, and then we'll have a dialogue between Martha and I, and then we could hopefully take some questions from everybody in the room. Um, okay, so the truth is not exhibition at the Galerie Lalonde in Chelsea commences by requiring visitors to make a decision. To enter the exhibition, one has to decide whether to pay $0.25 to pass through the ordinary turnstile or to play the game Just Dance on the nearby Xbox console that you see there on the right-hand side of the screen that uses a sensor to detect the player's movements as they follow the moves on the screen. So, Martha, what role does the turnstile play in this exhibition, and what's the significance of the choice that the visitors have to make?
Uh, which one first?
What role does the turnstile play?
Well, it requires of the person entering the gallery to make a choice about whether it's worth 25 cents, even if the 25 cents, as you can see in the left on the desk, is a quarter. Quarters are available, and there's a little sign that says you can take a quarter if you don't have one, for especially our non coin carrying friends and also those from other countries and people who don't feel like spending their own quarter. But it converts what is normally regarded as a space you can freely enter as something you have to make a choice. And the usual way that people gain entry to things in our hyper capitalized economy is by paying. It also simply asks you to stop and think, as I said at the beginning of this, like, what the hell is this doing here? And where am I stopped by turnstiles like this? It calls up a whole series of associations for me and possibly for the visitor. And I think for quite a few people, it's very annoying because they have to stop. They can't just flow in. Uh,
What's the significance of the choice that they have to make?
well, the fact that you can pay 4 times as much and exercise yourself by dancing and having a good time is one of the signal elements of our culture, of course. You can choose, usually by paying a little bit more for something, to avoid everything that's going on around you and just engage in something that all people really need to do, which is move, listen to music, have fun, hang out with someone else, or avoid what's going on in everyday life. So it is a kind of silly prompt. And I actually had a Dance Revolution machine, but it broke. So, of course, it's now in the realm of everyday life. You don't have to go to an arcade. You could stand in the ante room of the gallery and not bother to go into the show.
Okay. So the first thing one encounters, I did go in the show. So the first thing one encounters as one goes into one enters through the turnstile and into the central space of Truth is Not, is reading Hannah Arendt politically for an American 21st Century, a 2006 piece, which features a thicket of hanging translucent strips with printed passages from the writings of the philosopher Hannah Arendt. As I entered, I can see, as I entered through the turnstile and I was confronted with the reading Hannah Arendt politically installation, I could also see gallery visitors perusing the photo montages that were addressed on the room's walls through the transparent plastic strips of reading Hannah Arendt politically. Those transparent strips with Arendt's texts seem to envelope the entire room, um, including the artworks on the wall and the gallery goers, into one large ensemble, as if I was entering into an immersive exhibition. And to alert viewers to the intricate relationship between texts and images in the show, because one is reading the text by Arendt and is looking at the montages on the wall and seeing the visitors looking at the works. Um, Now, reading Hannah Arendt politically dates from 2006, as I noted a second ago. Tell us about the origins of this piece and what led you to exhibit it in 2025 in Truth is Not.
Um, First, I'd like to say that because these photographs are, of course, since it's architectural photography, somewhat wide angle, they actually increase the distance among the various hangings, uh, which gives not quite an accurate representation of how it feels to be in the space. The previous image was helpful because it showed a person and it was less wide angle. Um, yeah, but still, we also, of course, are observant of the ADA requirements that there be adequate room for people with assisted mobility devices to be able to walk through unimpeded, I mean, to move through, excuse me, unimpeded, such as wheelchairs, even carriages. As is common for me, the origin of this work is an invitation to participate in an exhibition. This came in 2005 from a couple of curators in Berlin who were working on something they called Reading Hannah Arendt. And I thought, oh, it'll be a good opportunity for me to read Hannah Arendt because I have many grievances against her while still admiring many of the things she's written, including her foundational description of bare life and the necessity of being a national somewhere, because personhood stems from one's association with a recognized state. And that actually played a big role in what we did with people whom we called terrorists back during the Iraq Afghanistan war, and of course applies now as well. Also, her writing on the Pentagon Papers and on Eichmann, of course, which is the first thing of hers that I read. My grievances against her stemmed from the fact that I was a war protester during Vietnam, and she was against the student protests, which I now understand, sort of, as a fear that the historical legacy of society would be destroyed by the raging protesters because they did go into professors' offices and rip up files for people who were collaborating with the military. So the show was at the former Jewish girls' school in Berlin, and Hannah Arendt was a Jewish refugee, and it just was really appealing. It gave me the opportunity to read all of the origins of totalitarianism, which I find, like many leftists, some difficulty in squaring her views completely. But be that as it may, I spent about 6 months reading her stuff, and it became very clear to me that this description, sorry, applied directly to George W. Bush, unquestionably the worst president we'd ever had up until that point. Once we got Trump, it became clear that he was going to sink to number two because we are in the consummately worst president we've ever had. And everything that she wrote about totalitarianism applies plus, 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 with a few minor uh, updatings to a different mode of operation to our current president.
So the first room of the show is full of the House Beautiful photo montages that juxtapose interior and exterior spaces. The Bringing the War Home photo montages, for instance,
Yeah.
intertwine middle class life with the horrors of military conflict in a way that feels both of a piece and fundamentally strange and incongruous in a way the image makes sense but doesn't make sense at the same time in terms of putting it together compositionally for the spectator. They mix together the domestic and the martial, making home life a literal war zone. The series started off with a set of works that you subsequently call Beauty Knows No Pain, which are informed by feminism. And in many ways, this feminist project continues throughout the House Beautiful photo montages all the way through to the present. What prompted you to develop House Beautiful Beauty Knows No Pain in the 1960s? And how did it segue into the House Beautiful Bringing the War Home photo montages?
So first, let me say none of these ever had titles. When they became objects, I had to give them titles, and it was fun, but you didn't quite get the titles right, and I can't blame you. The the preceding series was the ones addressing women and gender representation. They were very much about representation of women. And as the caption says, it's called Body Beautiful or Beauty Knows No Pain. The subsequent works about war is House Beautiful. So they rhyme in that way. And the fact is that I was influenced by what should I say, the analyses that some women were making about the way women are represented in magazines and the media and movies, which had been circulating for a long time, certainly since Simone de Beauvoir. But I went to a lecture by some middle class women who were pretty exercised over it. And I thought, yeah, it drives me crazy that the New York Times Magazine has lingerie ads uh, of women as infants, essentially infantilized women next to their very serious articles about the state of the world. So that was my first impulse. And I thought I wanted to make something of this by using the simplest thing that anyone can do, the same thing we did as children in the classroom, or if you had a cork board, you were pasting pictures together. But I also, well, for the next series, I keep that looking at this, um, the one on the screen. Eventually, I wanted to have, for the ones called House Beautiful, to have a rational space. A lot of the ones in Body Beautiful do not have a rational space where the viewer could enter and make some kind of decision or judgment, look around, and think about the space I've created, which of course deviates from the space that's normally presented in these magazines, where you would have images of a mother and presumably some deceased small person next to her, maybe, and upscale furnishings and upscale digs. Did that make sense?
Mhm. Now, when you returned to the House Beautiful series in the 1990s, the
This
early 1990s,
one. This is
and then again in the 21st century, some of the works invert the combination of interior and exterior, locating the pictured middle-class women and fashion models now into the war scenes. Scenes of death and destruction replace the sleek interiors and modern furnishings. The conceptual structure is essentially the same, but the interior now seeps into the exterior and not vice versa as in the earlier pieces. Um, why this subtle shift, and how would you explain it?
I don't know. Is there such a big shift?
Well,
Oh,
the
look at that.
interior is disappears, the domestic interior disappears, and now the personages are put into the war zone. There's a shift there.
Not in the ones that are on the screen, but for the ones with Saddam's palace, you're absolutely right. The Febreze one, the model housewife is cleaning up, and for these later, the ones from 2008, it is not about being inside a home. The home is gone. Well, this was so. What happened was I, I'll talk about why I made these works. I do want to point out that photo montage was something I did between about 1965 and then 1972. And I'm going to give a little note about how I got to the anti-war stuff. So I was doing these about women, and I was, I guess, at my mother's dining room table, and I saw an image of a Vietnamese woman, two women actually, and several children swimming. I guess it's a famous photo. I know the name of the photographer, but of course, under stress, I can't remember it. Ridiculous, but true. And I thought, look at that. It's so powerful. It was full of anguish and angst. It was a great photo. And I thought, well, I could use the same stuff that I was doing with images of women to interrupt the reception of what the representation was, do the same thing. But as I said, I decided that the missing element was the American home, because the whole rationale of war photography is that there's a here and a there. And my whole point is, ain't no such thing. We are there, they are here, because there is no division. It's one world, and we are, in this case, not only the hegemon, but also the prime driver of what's happening over there. So I stopped making photo montages and moved on to other things in the early 70s. And around 2004, I was invited to take part in a show in the art world by two young curators called Election. And I thought, oh, maybe I should make some photo montages, neither of which I think you have in your set. So I made two, one called Election Lindy, and the other one, I also Election something. But I couldn't stop because so these are cut and paste. No, I'll get back to this one in a minute. This is the only fully digitized photo montage I've ever made. It's almost unreadable. It had nothing to do with doing this for anything except I was going crazy with the absolute um, wrenching of language, the Orwellian doublespeak that represented what Republicans have always done and are doing still. So framing the discourse for Daddy's War got incorporated into the series because it was a photo montage. But so where was I before this popped up to
No, but
distract?
let's stay with photo montages since they play such an important part in the show. Now,
Well, just let me finish my sentence.
okay.
When I collect papers to cut up, I have lots and lots and lots of them. So I had made two for the election show, and then I just went crazy and made 20. And then in 2008, modern painters asked, would I make a cover for them? I'm like, wait, modern painters? I'm not a painter anymore. And I thought, yes, but it's my duty to do this. So then I made a bunch more in 2008, and they're different. I decided that no more home interior. Now the battlefield is the site. Okay.
So in 1969 with the colonies, the colonies that began in 1969, it's a sequence of photo montages. You extended House Beautiful's appropriated scenes of middle class homes by grafting appropriated images of the moon and outer space now into the U.S. suburban interiors. What does the colonies cluster photo montages have to do with the rest of the House Beautiful series?
Okay, so this one is the one that most people can't figure out, and rightly so, because it's not so flashy or apparent. But this is a architected house with lovely windows opening onto a glorious exterior, which actually are a series of our most favoriteest room in the house, which is the bathroom. So, in a way, it's about the claustrophobia of our expectations and aspirations um, to create a space that suits our needs in every way and where we don't even have to pretend to look out and see what's going on because it's all there. So the others are a little more catchy, like that. A lot catchier, yes. So what I am doing is to say that we are completely in our own bubble, our ideological envelope. We would like to um, not only dominate the notion of the good life on the planet, but to carry this imperialist view everywhere you go, including Mars today. So it is about the dream as what our spaceship, this one is a good example of that, conquest. And of course, this makes me want to go back and say that, of course, it's inevitable to realize that the images of American home interiors are, in a very handy word we now use, weaponized as a way of saying, we are the great nation. We have total ownership on what the dream of life should be.
Hmm. I mean, I was struck by the composite image in the show of a frog jumping out of a pot of boiling water set against the swirling eye of a hurricane. Is this juxtaposition a metaphor for the dangers of global warming? Or does the meaning of the montage extend beyond that?
Well, it was uh, an invitation from a publication, Art Forum, to make a photo montage, to make a work, sorry, they don't specify medium, uh, in recognition of the fact that Donald Trump was defeated for president. So I like cliches when they're suitable because they make people in the art world annoyed. And they make me annoyed, but that annoyance I find very pleasurable. So this is a frog jumping out of the pot of boiling water. That is, this is this work is called Break for Freedom, and it is about getting rid of Trump, we thought. But of course, what we're jumping into is the current reality, which is a planet aboil and a planet in which we will find less and less ability to survive as a civilization and possibly even as a species, except as some minor leftovers somewhere while the Earth changes to a habitat for something else.
Mhm. So, and what relationship between what's the relationship between your attraction to the mass cultural images that you're appropriating from magazines and pop art, which was quite prolific at the moment when you began this project? I mean, which artists and what aspects of pop art most interested you when you commenced this series that you continue to this day?
Well, first, I'd like to say I was in high school when that happened, and I had a funny dual experience. I had just read, I guess I was 16 maybe when I was an art editor for the high school publication. It was a big high school. Uh, and I read Ulysses and I looked at the work that people were submitting, and I wasn't an art student. I absolutely refused to study art in school, except I studied ceramics, which is art, but I was a painter. But I was intent on getting an actual academic education. So I'm running on several tracks at once. What I learned both from looking at pop, which initially struck me as unbelievably dumb, was that it was consciously, of course, Warhol was the one, unlike Wesselman, who annoyed the daylights out of me for the misogyny and objectification of women, as did most pop artists, except for the female ones. Um, what I learned was, and for an abstract expressionist painter and a reader of realist novels, what I learned was style was a choice. And this was like a bombshell. And I said, "Whoa, it's not the spirit of God flowing into a genius, who of course should be a man." And I will say that even all female abstract painters at that time tried to identify as men or act as much like men as they could, which you cannot blame them for. Um, and this kind of phallic woman is still a very, look at Christine Noam. She's like dropping dead with a false face that doesn't quite fit her skull yet, but she's also carrying, heavy weapons and murdering puppies and so on. Um, so the idea that one could make a choice was an existential issue for me. And I thought, okay, what is it about pop? Okay, high modernism is dying. Yes, we thought in those terms because I had friends who were 10 years older in the New York underground and the bohemia that no longer exists. So I thought, this is a critique of transcendence. Art promised us transcendence. This model no longer works. And I was very much impressed with the idea of Robert Morris and so on, uh, other sculptors. What you see is what you see. And although I thought that was reductive and pop was reductive, and in fact, I saw pop as a seething critique of consumerism, I also understood its hold on the imagination of a mass public. In fact, I wrote about all this stuff, but I thought that since we were in the middle of a damn war, it was a moment in which I had to decide, am I actually going to engage with the everyday, or am I going to remain an abstract expressionist painter? So I remained an abstract expressionist painter, but also became a photographer and a photomontagist.
I mean, clearly, Frank Stella's "What You See Is What You See" was very different from your abstract expressionism.
Sorry.
Uh, how aware? But I want to stay with the photomontages. How, since that's what's featured in the show, um, I have to ask this, but how aware were you of John Hartfield's photomontage practice when you started to make the House Beautiful photomontages? What about the agitprop legacies of Russian and Soviet constructivism? Did you know Eisenstein's filmic montage at the time? Because there was a similar movement in the earlier 20th century that your work rhymes with, and I'm just wondering where that rhyme comes from.
Very appropriate. The movement, of course, was Dada. I was very influenced by futurist painters like Bala, uh, because those were okay in the Cold War. We were in the Cold War. The 50s were a monstrous decade, especially in New York, which was completely pervaded by McCarthyism, and an unbearable quietism in the art world, which still uh, carries its heavy legacy of being unwilling to engage with uh, everyday affairs for a number of different reasons, which I won't go into right now because it's not quite on topic. But uh, because of the Cold War, we didn't see any communist shit. We didn't see Hartfield. I only knew one or two of his works, and I thought they were great. They were made for newspapers. They had lots of words on them. What I was interested in doing was making a flyer to hand out at demonstrations that would counter the crap that left sectarians were handing out that looked like they'd been written by people with the same kind of logorrhea I'm demonstrating. They were covered with words. They didn't even have margins on them. They were like translated from Albanian. They just were like, what? I wanted to make pictures that were, um, without question, attack on attacking. That is, they were anti-war and staged the war in places other than the battlefield far away in the jungles and the hooches. Okay, so this is the Febreze one I was referring to before. This is, of course, the other series. The early series was intended for one thing and one thing only. It was to be Xerox because my father was a lawyer and he introduced me to his friend, the Xerox machine. Because otherwise, I was typing his briefs with numerous uh, uh, carbon copies. And if you make a mistake, you have to correct every copy anyway. So this was magical. And I said, well, I could just make these photocopies and hand them out. And of course, they were black and white. You could get color copies, but they were very expensive. So I just wanted something really apparent, which also can be considered propaganda. That's fine. So I didn't sign them, I didn't date them. I photocopied them and I put the originals away because one keeps one's things, but or most of them anyway. So Hartfield was not available. I saw one work of Hannah Huch, which was great, but it wasn't, it was Dada, and it was a very famous one of machinery and so on. And I never heard of Claude Cahun as the anyone. And here's a kick. We didn't even see the works of Walter Benjamin, because they weren't translated until the later 60s. Nothing leftist from Germany was making its way into the hands of Americans until I was in college and so on. So I was actually closer to propaganda posters and to advertising, because of course advertising is a surreal endeavor, and just putting things together.
Hmm. What about, I mean, when did you first learn about Bertolt Brecht's Verfremdungseffect, the alienation effect, and how important was that for you with these juxtapositions?
So part of the importance of the art scene in New York was that two things. Well, I'll start with the Living Theater, which was extremely important in my life. And they did Mother Courage. Now, we might not today agree with their interpretation of Mother Courage. It knocked me off my feet, but also a number of other um, absurdist and leftist, also um, Six Characters in Search of an Author. In other words, the uh, advent of postmodernism and also the kind of critical theater that one found in Europe. So Brecht and the alienation effect became extremely important for me. In fact, along with being a Godardian at that age, I was a Brechtian. In many ways remain so. But the other thing is movies, of course. And of course, you asked about Eisenstein. And I was an avid reader of the debates among the early filmmakers about whether one shows mass movements as masses or whether you personalize them as in Hollywood. To which my answer to this day is, yeah, good question. So obviously these images personalize, but they also don't really personalize because they are already references to representations that pre-exist. So, am I answering your question?
Yeah, but Brecht, as you know, also used humor productively in his theatrical productions. And what's the role of humor in your work and these pieces that we're talking about? And what kind of humor is it that you mobilize? How would you describe it?
I'll just say I'm a New York Jew. That's it. This is all, and the way I talk, the way I present, I see laughter on the faces on this of the audience. They're right. Those who laugh understand that New York humor is dry and snide. I remember as a little girl, maybe 5, my father would tell a lot of jokes, but I never understood them. I thought, why is that a joke? Why is that a joke? And it took me a while to realize that it was the way he presented them, but that you never, as the joke teller, you don't laugh at your own jokes, and you also have a slightly threatening tone. Groucho Marx was a big influence, the Marx Brothers. So, although I was so the Young People's Socialist League, who I was not a part of, in fact, they're Trotskyites, but that's fine. Those are the intellectual branch of uh, young communist or socialist oriented people at the time. They would play movies, and I got to see, maybe I was 14, Battleship Potemkin. And then, the much more grandiose Eisenstein movies, and montage obviously was fantastically important because of the way it handled both scene and time. So all these things, and then Godard appeared, and I was smitten. And I became more and more smitten as the years went by. And the Dziga Vertov group, I also saw Dziga Vertov and Chris Marker, or Marker if you prefer. All these things have been major influences on me. Everybody who wants to interrupt the realist narrative and get away from the idea of the authenticity of the actor appeals to me.
So you talked about the kind of humor, but what is the role of humor? What do you because Brecht used humor productively. It had a function. What is the function of humor in your productions, even in your presentation? I mean, even as you're speaking now, humor is being mobilized. To what effect?
George and Jeb, in case you don't recognize those guys, this is election two on the screen. Okay, so if you can say that pop is the art of the dandy, particularly as uh, practiced by, shall we say, gay artists primarily, a kind of a disaffected alienation or a disdain. Um, the other approach is to interrupt with humor. And I humor. So if you walk into the exhibition, the first sheet that you see is Hannah Arendt saying, "Hey, the way you get to these guys is through laughter." No tyrant wants to be laughed at. They can't take it because, they're inflated egos. The guy behind the curtains. So, first of all, I remember declaiming something in Ellie Anton's living room and said, "Look, she's a natural actor." And I thought, wait, that's just normal life. uh, I can't help it. It is one way to kind of cut through the extreme moralistic superiority one often finds in moral in political discourse that attempts a kind of fake piety, though I don't think falling back on a few curse words is a better way of handling political discourse. But I do think that humor cuts through the attempt to agree, obey, and follow.
Okay, okay. Now, much of your artistic production engages with space, spatial issues, we'll call it. Projects such as Secrets of the Street, which I just recently rewatched yesterday. It was an amazing piece. The Bowery into Inadequate Descriptive Systems, Rites of Passage, the airport photos, reflect on the production of space in a fairly concerted way. What relationship does spatial production have to social systems in your view?
Well, all of politics is territory, isn't it? And of course, we are spatial creatures. We're not flat. We live somewhere, and whoever controls the territory controls the discourse and every facet of life. And it also is a fabulous metaphor for the creation of a thinking space. And the big influence on me was Henri Lefebvre, somewhat later in life, when his work on the production of space. But he also wrote, for me, a very influential book on the politics of everyday life. So, I mean, how can you dispute that the landlord of your space tries to be the landlord of your soul? I don't know if that's an answer or not.
No, sure. That's. I mean, now, so let's go back into the exhibition. And as one enters the second room, and I presume a lot of the people in the audience, in the room, our chat room, whatever, our Zoom room, have been to the show. And as one enters the second room, the exhibition features a 1993 photographic tableau. It Lingers is titled. You place the piece's largest images at the top, of a kind of pyramid, and arranged an ensemble of documents of wars in the early 1990s at the bottom of that pyramid shape, if you want to refer to it that way. What's the relationship of images to images in terms of scale and placement in this photographic tableau? And how does the juxtaposition of images to text, visual and narrative representations function in this ensemble? Is there a hierarchy or are they equivalent?
So I was working mostly on intuition in a sense. Uh, they this was made in 93, as it says, and by the way, it lingers, has three dots after it, because of course if it lingers it can't end with a comma or a period or nothing. So it is about war. And the but being a good Benjaminian, though I didn't know he had this position, I like to look at the just past as well as the present. So the one on the photograph, the tall photograph, is a picture from the LA Times of a ticker tape parade in New York, and it's off register, so the color is mushed up, of heroes of Desert Storm coming home. That was the first Gulf War. On the right are Bosnian women protesting at the UN in Geneva about, in this case, the murder of a young Bosnian woman, because Bosnia was under siege. We were in the middle of the Yugoslav wars. This was commissioned, that is, to do a work, the invitation, from a museum in Graz. Graz, of course, has a history with Hitler, but it's also right near the ex-Yugoslavia border, and was a crossing point and was involved in the movement from east to west. The large picture below is of the man at the Betty Mackey foundry, which is 5 blocks from my house, pointing to the Iwo Jima statue, which they made in the Betty Mackey foundry and then took in pieces down to Arlington National Cemetery, and it helped the Marine Corps become a separate uh, service as opposed to being under the Air Force, or the Navy, sorry. And on the right is a photograph I took in the famous flea mart in the center of Vienna, where one could buy one of many, many, many images of Hitler, which shocked the hell out of me when I went there. Everyone knew that Austria had not been denazified, but still, that seemed a bit much. Now I'm sure they're twice the size. The images below are about representations of war and its events and its images. And also articles that show that the image you're looking at isn't true, or the discussion of the Iwo Jima planting, which is a big deal. There's a photograph signed by, was it Joe Rosenthal to Louis Lowry, who had actually photographed the original planting of the flag considered inadequate. This is a whole long story, which you could find on Wikipedia, I'm sure. And next to it is an image from NORAD, which is the US-Canadian cooperation about long-range ballistic missiles. Interesting. And in the middle is an article from the New York Times that pulls no punches, US buried Iraqi troops during the Gulf War. Everything else is some way to evade the truth about war, or to sugarcoat it, or use some euphemistic language. And the line below at the bottom are the current wars underway or conflicts in the New York Times when I was putting this work together.
It's an interesting piece. Um, I hadn't seen it before this show, and
Oh,
so
yeah.
it was nice that it was featured the way it was featured. Let me ask one more question because I'd like to leave plenty of time for the Q&A. Now, if one walks through the exhibition as the way I did. The show's final piece is this four-channel video installation featuring a steady stream of photographs that you made during street demonstrations and protest marches in primarily New York City between 2012 and 2025. What, in your view, is the significance of ending the Truth is Not show, which problematizes so many images and narratives drawn from mass media with this massive display of individual and community-driven efforts that play out in city streets? And this really comes back to something that you said earlier: whoever controls the territory controls the discourse. What
Have images to show aside from this, which is good, but doesn't show any actual, yeah, like those. Um, oh, because I, like so many, undoubtedly many of those listening to me in my over-caffeinated way, rant on about war and so on. We are at a moment in which we are hanging over an abyss in which we lose our country as we know it, our nation, I should say. And I have always believed, firmly believed, and will continue to believe until I'm shown to be wrong, that the most important thing the person can do, aside from what you may do as an artist or a teacher or whatever else it is that you do, the most important thing you can do is to act as a citizen, resident, friend in the United States. Get out there and show what you think, join others in demonstrating. You got more than this one, right? Okay, so there are 8 marches that I photographed between January and May Day. This is the ACT UP Tesla March of April something or other. They're all drawn from the same one. I would have chosen a few others, but you just have to get out there because there's nothing that makes governments pause so much as people in the streets. Even Henry Kissinger, the bomber in chief, said to Richard Nixon, "We can't bomb Hanoi because the kids are in the streets." This is an earlier March. This is early April.
So you end the show with possibility.
Um, Necessity, in my opinion, but yeah, possibility. If we don't believe we can change things, we might as well just move to Canada. Oh, wait, that's not such a good choice.
All right. Well, Martha, thank you. I believe our time is up. I'd like to see if there are questions that we can field from the room. Thanks for your discussion.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you so much, Martha and Alexander, for that conversation, which was such a pleasure to listen to. If you have a question, feel free to post it at the link in the chat. I have a few questions already from the audience, which I'll go ahead and ask. The first one is from Sergio. Sergio asks, what advice or words of encouragement would you share with visual artists like me who make political artwork and quite often face lots of resistance from curators afraid to make viewers feel uncomfortable, or art critics who insist that political art is quote unquote bad art? Thank you.
Could we put up one more image?
Mm-hmm.
The Trump image.
Okay, I got it.
So, sorry. This is this is from 2016. The fact is that the art world is first of all, we have to acknowledge, we could take this down. I just want to say the name. This was just when he was elected, but the names behind, he said, he's boasting. Again, I'm calling on the widely known cliche, where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters. Okay, it's like incredible. And of course, he goes on and on and on. But the flags behind him are covered with the names of people of color all around the US who were killed by police with no consequence. Okay, we can remove that because it's why do I show that? Because it's a difficult image for curators and gallerists to accept. I don't see Sergio, but maybe he doesn't want to be seen. Um, I think you have to make a choice. Uh, there are places you can show. You can also send them to the Siren, though, I think, which is a newspaper by Noah Fisher, Coco Fusco, maybe Greg Shaletta, and a couple of other people. You can form your own stuff. You can put them on Instagram, which I don't do. People might work up there, but I don't. I don't know the answer to this because I have discovered and have written about the fact that the art world likes things that are long ago or far away and believes, and this is crucial, critique is good if it's critique in general. If it's critique in specific, it's dangerous because donors, think of Bill Ackman in relationship to Columbia University, donors don't like politics that are disruptive to their ideas. So the answer is keep on keeping on, but everybody has to make this decision for themselves. You could do what the people who put together the election show did, which is find a space, have an exhibition, but be aware there may be consequences. I mean, uh, I have borne many consequences and I've been censored and so on, and yet I'm happy to say that I have actually reached the public. And I also would like to thank the many professors around the country who have chosen to show my work over the years. And also, I used to tour with my work. So there are many ways to get together with people, but to expect a system that is commercial and in trouble at the moment to show your work if it's directly political may be a bit of a stretch. I'm not saying not to try. And outside the US, of course, it's much easier.
Sergio, I gave you the opportunity to unmute if there's anything you want to say at the end.
Of course.
I don't think we can hear you. I don't know if your microphone, there we go. Now we can.
Yeah, but I don't hear.
No, we still can't hear you, unfortunately.
Fair.
Okay, I think
There
Good.
we go.
oh
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you guys for this wonderful moment and Martha, thank you so much for your work. It was such an inspiration going to the gallery and just seeing someone so boldly putting this work out there. It's great encouragement because it's difficult sometimes, to put work that you feel you must produce and put out there. Um, so just thank you so much for it's just so encouraging to see your work out there.
Thank you. I also would recommend not expecting to make a living from it. That's all. An inevitable thing to say. I mean, I was a professor and happily so for 40 years. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Sergio, and thanks for that answer, Martha. The next question is from Terrence. Terrence, I see you. Would you like to unmute to ask directly?
Yeah, I would just like to ask Martha and Alexander. Thank you firstly for the opportunity to allow me to speak, but I would just like to ask Martha and Alexander what they think about the aestheticization of art that is political or maybe critiquing a certain institution, because I was wondering sort of about the paradox of using maybe aesthetics that are regularly Western in a way to criticize an institutions that are also sometimes mostly from the global north or, to criticize institutions like whiteness, for example. I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on these subjects. Thank you.
Alex, do you want to try? I'd like to try as well, but um, Alex,
You can start, Martha, unless you want me to start.
um, uh, first of all, I would assume that first we're speaking to our community. And of course, it, as I said, and please don't take this wrong, it's on purpose an extreme example. What got me to do the anti-war photo montages, for which I want to say, as usual, my aim always is to say, this is so simple, you can do it too. In other words, to speak without any highfalutin, I hate to sound like an idiot, but you know what I mean. You speak the vernacular as far as you're comfortable with it, because if you want a critique of, let's say, whiteness, though I find that an odd category, I understand it as a systemic problem, but it's not a force. Uh, it's a source of power. But let me just get back to it. Would I hand out a flyer that looks like a translation from Albanian that, because of Enver Hoxha, who was the favored communist leader of a number of left groups, actually, Revcom at the time. I think you address people where they are. And also, one tries to, if at all possible, cooperate with people who have the critique from, say, the global south and so on. That is, you collaborate with people who do not share that hegemonic relation. I have a show that goes around called If You Lived Here, which is precisely about housing, homelessness, shelter needs, access to power, which is populated by people from a lot of places, but specifically, it's not my work. It's people who live in the place where the show is staged. And that's a way of creating a discourse that is not designed by me, but shall we say, collaborated on or cooperatively put together by local people and also local publications. That's my best answer. But there are many answers to that question, because critiques of are hegemonic, or, and I've used that word a lot, but we are, for the moment, the hegemon, critiques of the power of other institutions comes from many sources and is necessary on every ground. So I appreciate your question. I think there are many problems involved with representations of others. So you have to strike a balance. Obviously, you want them to emanate from the others rather than our view.
Sergio, this is Terrence. One of the things that I found most striking about this show that Martha just put together is that even though it's a show of images, proliferation of images and text, um, up until the last four-channel video, she takes none of the images. They are appropriated images. It's a montage, which I think is a kind of vernacular use of technique that number one, has a lot of potential, and number two, um, is something that a lot of people in the global south mobilize for many reasons. But one primary reason would be just the accessibility of the materials. So the juxtaposition can produce meaning without having to go high production. So that doesn't address the question of the critique of white supremacy, which is, I think, a separate question that I think Martha's work does indirectly. It would take us a while to unpack that, and we'd be speculating because I can't think of it. I mean, a critique of Trump is a critique of white supremacy, in my view, but we don't need to go there right now. But in terms of the technique, it's it's a technique that, as you know, is shared by many people around the globe who are able to mobilize it, and just juxtaposition creates images, new images, and creates art, and that's essentially what she's doing with not just the photo montages, but also some of the video montages. A lot of her work mobilizes that technique, which I think is one of the reasons why markets are so resistant to it, because she's not taking her photos, she's appropriating and mobilizing in a new way.
I say I take plenty of photos, just they're not usually
No, but not in this particular,
show
not
them.
yes,
Right.
yes, okay, but not in this.
My
uh,
practice.
Tell me, what apart from that four-channel video, was there a photo that you had taken in any of the, this is it. We walked through an entire show. And until you get to the end where there's this promise of, the hopeful moment of, where we could go from here, instead of just ending in the dismal way that we're all in. I mean, I teach at Columbia University. Things are not going well. We turn it around and, say, well, here's where the possibility lies, namely in the street. That's why the Henri Lefebvre quote that Martha pulled from the air, about they who control the territories, the streets control the discourse, is apropos.
Thank you for that question, Terrence, and thank you for those answers, Martha and Alexander. I think that's going to conclude our Q&A portion of the program today. But I know, Martha, you're going to read something at the end for us to think about.
Oh, what was that? How is it coming up? Oh, there it is. Okay. Yes, let's hope the gravelly, allergy-ridden
Do you
voice.
want, Martha, do you want to introduce what it is, or do you want me to tell the audience what it is before you start reading?
You could do that.
So Martha is going to close us out with an essay that she wrote for the guest critics section of the Brooklyn Rail called Truth Is or Is Not.
Which was invited by a friend and former student of mine, Jeffrey Batchen, whom I admire deeply. It was published in June 2024, and it is of a language designed to be read on the page, so it isn't so clear that it will communicate directly to you. It's a bit more literary. It's called Truth Is or Is Not. Matters of truth permeate public discourse, yet what the word itself denotes remains unstable, and the connection of truth utterances to the real is always at issue. This is a truism, but the contours of our fascination with truth, fact, objectivity, and somewhat belatedly authenticity have evolved in tandem with the social changes brought about by the growing consolidation of industrial capitalism and the corollary urbanization. Newspapers and magazines, which with greatly expanded reach and influence on a mass public, were pressed to develop a professionalized code of conduct in the face of government censorship. Their innovation was, quote unquote, objectivity, a new seal of truth on public narratives. We still yearn to believe in the reliability of journalism's truth-telling presented as stories, literary or theatrical narratives enfolding truth claims. Tailing along was the demand for some form of truth-telling and then evidentiary truthfulness in visual representation, abetted by late 19th century uses of photography to record sites, monuments, urban districts, and proto-anthropological observations of peoples. But aside from some slippage, the bifurcation of image work, especially moving images, into truth-telling in fiction, even if allegory or parable, and nonfiction, a strange way to name something meant to convey truths, has remained of great concern. This is despite the fact that fiddling with images began right at the outset of camera work. But we've entered what some call late-stage capitalism and some the Anthropocene, with a mighty degree of skepticism toward basic assertions, propositions, and truth claims given real-world outcomes. The continued technicalization, rationalization, and quantification of human experience and its representations, and the concomitant development of sophisticated means of telling big, consequential lies with images, now at a new peak, has arrived as the promises of modernity to cure all ills through science and technology in an information age have been perceived as hollow. The promises of, I'm just repeating this, the promises of modernity to cure all ills through science and technology in an information age have been perceived as hollow. The negative consequences of the heralded conquest of nature have led to a period of discontent marked by a pervasive sense of disconnection and a search for alternative explanations of what is. People turn to dodgy alternative propositions, many of them proffered by bullies and snake oil salesmen, a dodginess that was supposed to have been bested in the era of scientific rationality. But the inherent shakiness of truth claims, see under postmodernism, has been widely accepted by non-technical elites, underlining the proposition that belief and acceptance may rest as much on context, very much including group norms, as on evidence. In the art world, that genteel space, the rule of thumb is that truth is best approached through inference, not direct statement, which would be deemed either infantile or propagandistic. The rule of thumb is that truth is best approached through inference, not direct statement, which would be deemed either infantile or propagandistic. Seeking to read a proposition from an artwork is seen as a Philistine concern, for the relation between truth and reality in art is widely felt to be more properly located through the formalist aesthetics and transcendent universalism often associated with modernism. This flatters those in the know, but the democratization of art institutions, quote unquote, has changed the appeal. Art as experience, not so much as revelation. And yet the meaning of art is often interpreted through a perceived connection to the lived life of the artist or their identified social group. Race, gender, and ethnicity are the reigning examples. Re-envisioning objective claims for the truth of the work through a subjective or cultural lens, through a claim to personal authenticity. The artist remains the crucible, although different from the genius of high modernism, where group affiliation was rarely a plus. Most certainly, the contentious political affiliations of the past 150 years or so were not greeted positively in the art world, and especially not during the Cold War. Truth was emphatically held to lie elsewhere, no matter what artists may have thought. Speaking personally, okay, I'm in the home stretch, sort of. Speaking personally, the question of truth and social justice inevitably has preoccupied me since childhood, but it was difficult to consider making a direct argument as an abstract expressionist painter. Turning to photography, one work of mine, The Bowery and Two Inadequate Descriptive Systems, centered on questioning what might be involved in the construction of whatever truths documentary images might convey. Again, centered on questioning what might be involved in the construction of whatever truths documentary images might convey. Earlier, I turned to a hybrid model of proposition making, namely photomontage, drawing both from Pop's deadpan dis/connection to the second nature, quote unquote, of industrial modernity, and from the surrealist invocation of the interior dream world. These were to me more science than magic and more inclined toward propositions than simple expressions of feeling, sorry. So I'm talking about photomontage. I first turned my attention to magazine representations of women, putting ideas from two different realms, lingerie ads say, and those for kitchen appliances in the same space. I soon also addressed far more publicly the war in Vietnam and later Iraq by marrying magazine images of war with those depicting well-appointed homes, mostly interiors, some adorned with art, uniting widely separated physical spaces and disparate people within a single frame, uniting widely separated physical spaces and disparate people within a single frame, I could collide two rigidly separated lines of discourse about home and family on the one hand, and about a war on foreign soil on the other. I could suggest arguments against war without the need for words, drawing on that substrate of meanings and interpretations that seem to me inarguably true and perhaps widely shared. Idealized middle-class households do look like this, and scenes of war transposed to the home space do rise to the level of human subjectivity. One wonders how today's reliance on memes and other linguistic scripts meaningfully conveys truth. So I'm going to read those last two sentences. Idealized middle-class households do look like this, and scenes of war transposed to the home space do rise to the level of human subjectivity. One wonders how today's reliance on memes and other linguistic scripts meaningfully conveys truth. P.S. I wrote this little essay on my computer, but as I picked up my phone, there was a suggestion from Siri, a proprietary digital appurtenance I never use, saying simply, and I quote, "Truth is." That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Martha. That was really special to hear you read that. Thank you to you. Thank you to Alexander for today's conversation. Thank you to Eve and Grace and Mary at Gallery Lalong for all of their help in making today possible and providing those images that we looked at. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who are a sponsor for our new social environment program and make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you'll be able to watch this conversation shortly on YouTube. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our work, our staff, our operations, and our writers. You can support our work at the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Imelda Kajipe Ndaya, Eugenie Tsai, and CJ Salapare on the occasion of There Is Still a Tomorrow Mother at Silver Lens. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today. And thank you again, Martha and Alexander.
Brooklyn Rail, to Chloe and Magley and the team behind this all. And to Alex.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you.
Martha, you're
Thank you.
inspirational.
Thank you.
Thanks to the friends who attended.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Everybody, even if they're a dog.